Hey, what's going on, guys? In this video, I'm going to cover the #1 most asked question on my channel, and that is, how the heck do I find walleyes? I'm going to show you the 5 steps that you need to take every single time you go walleye fishing to determine the most likely walleye location for that day. And when I say every single time, I mean I personally go through these 5 steps mentally every single time I go walleye fishing, whether it's a day apart or 6 months apart. I guarantee you, if you take these 5 steps seriously, you will put yourself within arm's reach of at least a few fish, no matter what inland water body you're fishing, no matter what time of year. Now make sure you stick around to the end, because I'm also going to piece these 5 steps together and show you how to put a plan together to actually pick a spot in a couple of real world situations. So with that, let's get started with step #1. All right, guys, step #1 is determine your season. Now I typically break down walleye seasons into 8 sections. You've got early and late spring, early and late summer, early and late fall, early and late winter. Now there's mids between each one of those, and that is kind of a transition season that you can consider fish moving from one season to the next. When these seasons happen varies depending on your latitude and also the weather for that year. We'll kind of start with early spring. That's kind of when the kickoff for walleye season is. As far north as Canada, it can start in late May or mid-May. And on the southern range of walleyes range, it can be, even as early as March. So season #1, early spring, walleyes start spawning. As soon as the ice goes out, they start moving towards spawning areas. They typically stage out a little deeper away from those spawning areas. And then as the water temps warm up into the mid-40s, they move up, they spawn, and then they move back out again into those kind of transition areas. Some states allow you to fish for walleyes during that time, and others close the season. It just depends on what state you're in. So make sure you check your regulations before you go fishing for spawning walleyes. That's kind of that transition. So when I say shallow, these walleyes will typically spawn anywhere from 1 to 5 feet of water, and they typically spawn at night, but they will be in those areas even during the middle of the day sometimes. And typically, if you have current, inlet rivers, anything like that, spawning is going to occur near current most of the time. If you don't have current, you got to find rock, windswept rock and gravel. That's where they're going to spawn. Now moving into late spring, that's post spawn. And a lot of times those walleyes that spawn are going to be hard to catch, especially the females, for a week or two after the spawn. But they start to feed really heavily once they recover from the spawn. So it's a great time to catch fish in that 4 to maybe 15 feet of water. A piece of advice that Al Lindner has always talked about is 1 month after the spawn, look for those walleyes on the first break off of where they spawned. And I have tried it. It works. Wherever you think those walleyes have spawned, a month later, go check the first drop off of that area. Then we move into early summer. Early summer, a lot of times those fish are going to stay near those transition areas, but they're going to spread out a little bit. They're going to get even more aggressive as those water temps move up. Now moving into late summer, as those water temps warm up in the shallows, those fish are going to start transitioning out deeper. They don't like warm water, especially hot water, above 70 degrees. So as that warm water creeps its way down, they're going to start moving out deeper, and their food's going to start moving deeper as well into the basin and some of those deeper structures. And that's when electronics really come into play, is in that late summer period. Early fall can just be an extension of late summer. And oftentimes really the patterns don't change a whole lot into early fall. The fish are kind of just feeding up, and they can get really tough to catch. They can get really finicky. They've seen a lot of baits at that time of year. But if you can find some of those offshore schools that are a little bit more out of the way, it can be a really good way to catch a bunch of walleyes in late summer into early fall. Now, one of my favorite times to fish is that mid period between early fall and late fall, and then into late fall, because what happens is the reverse kind of happens as happens in the spring, and those fish start to move back up shallow again. At least some of them do. And they tend to get really aggressive and start feeding on big baits. And that is one of my favorite times to catch big walleyes, is in the fall. Now moving into early ice, typically those fish are going to still be shallow. They're going to still be where they were in late fall. There's not a whole lot of change. Now as the winter kind of progresses, oxygen levels start to drop up shallow, bait fish start to push out, walleyes follow them, and oftentimes they move deeper as the winter progresses. And then late ice, they start to move shallow again. That oxygen starts to replenish. Then the whole cycle starts over. They move shallow after ice out, and the whole cycle repeats again. So that should give you a general idea of how walleyes kind of progress through the seasons. And that'll give you a great starting point for step number 1. That eliminates an awful lot of water right there. So now let's move on to step number 2. Step number 2 is going to be finding the right water temp. Walleyes can feel a temperature change of 1/10 of a degree like we feel a temperature change of 1 degree. Just a couple degrees swing can really make a big difference on where you're finding those fish. Now, a couple trends. Early in the spring, warm water is key. The warmest water you can find, that's where those fish want to be. Walleye preferred temperature range is between 60 and 70 degrees. That's where they're the most active. So typically, if you want to catch the most active walleyes, the more the temps swing towards that temperature range, the more active those fish are going to be. And we're talking surface temps here. Now, as that early summer period starts to kick in, you're going to start getting some temps that tick above 70 degrees, and those fish are not going to stay in that temperature very long. They're going to want to move out into deeper water, cooler water, to get out of that uncomfortably warm water if they can. Now, that's not to say they won't make moves into those temps to feed at night, especially. They'll still move into that temp and out of it, but they're not going to stay there. Now, late summer, those fish are not going to be anywhere near the shallows because that water is way warmer than they like, and a lot of their food has moved out deep anyway. Midsummer, look for those cooler areas, especially if you only have a shallow lake to fish. If you don't have a basin to fish, look for those river inlets that have springs in them. Look for shady areas, anywhere that water is going to be a little bit cooler. And another factor to keep in mind here when we're talking temps, wind pushes the warmest water downwind. So if you are looking for cool water, fish the upwind side. If you're looking for the warmest water, fish the downwind side where that wind is pushing that warm water up to the bank. That's a really good thing to keep in mind because, again, if you're fishing a really hot lake, really warm lake, and you want to fish the coolest side, you can always fish that upwind side, and some of that cooler water will upwell on that side. Vice versa, in the spring, go to the wind-blown side, and you'll almost always find warmer water. Now, in the fall, believe it or not, even though the temps are dropping, and they may even drop below that walleye's preferred range, there is a huge reaction that occurs in walleyes in the fall when you get falling water temperatures and they feed really, really hard. And I've caught super aggressive walleyes down into the mid 40 water temps in the fall as those temperatures are falling. So typically in the spring, rising temps set off a bite. In the fall, it's the opposite. Dropping water temps often set off the bite. So pay attention to whether that temperature is going up or down and what season it is, and that should help you find fish as well. Now, one other factor to consider, especially in deep basin lakes, is the thermocline. So oftentimes deep lakes have a thermocline that sets up at about somewhere between 20 and 30 feet down over the basin of the lake. And what that is it's a layer of warm water, a band of mixed water that's real thin, and then a cold layer of water. That colder lower layer has less oxygen, but it's cooler. And then that kind of right at the thermocline is a nice mix of that cooler water with the more oxygenated warm water, and a lot of fish will hang out right in that thermocline area. And oftentimes you can see that on your electronics. You can see it as a band of kind of bugs and debris. Pay attention in the fall because when that water gets down into that right around upper 40s, 50-ish, that thermocline is going to disappear and the whole lake's going to just kind of mix, and that's called the fall turnover. And that can really move fish around like within a day. They can just go anywhere they want all of a sudden. They're no longer stuck to a stratification of water. So pay attention to that as well. Again, the walleye's preferred range is 60 to 70 if they can find it. They typically spawn at about 45, and everything else kind of revolves around that. Now let's get into step number 3. Now step number 3 is determining available or most likely food sources for those walleyes. If you can get a combination of the right season, the right temps, and the right food, you're well on your way to finding where those walleyes are at. Now, I'm going to kind of go through the progression of food and availability as the seasons go through, starting in early spring. So in early spring in most fisheries, that's when food is really the scarcest. And our walleyes often haven't really turned on the feed bag yet. But typically they're eating what's left over of the bait fish and the panfish from the season before. Now moving into late spring, you're going to start to get some of those young of the year bait fish moving into the mix. And walleyes will definitely predate on those little tiny bait fish early in the spring. And that's when I use smaller minnow imitating lures kind of in that late spring period. And I've seen schools of walleyes literally pushing clouds of just 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch long bait fish up against the shoreline and just gorging on them. Then you move into early summer, you start to get some bug hatches mixed in, and those bait fish are getting a little bigger. So there's kind of 2 routes you can go. You can look for those clouds of young of the year bait fish that are kind of moving out deeper into those weeds, and you can look for bug hatches. If there's bug hatches happening, I typically start fishing with leeches and crawlers. If I'm not seeing bugs, I'm assuming those walleyes are chasing those young of the year bait fish as they get a little bigger. You can start to use a little bit bigger baits as well, but I find that keeping it small typically works best. Now moving into late summer, a lot of those bait fish have grown up. They've moved offshore now, and they're staging in big schools and clouds on offshore structure and out in the basin. And there's also a bunch of bug hatches that happen late into the summer as well. So walleyes have tons of food available. Basically everything in the lake is available to them at that point. What really starts to happen on basin lakes that have pelagic forage like ciscos or smelt is those walleyes change over to that pelagic bait fish because it is such a nutritious food source. And you can often find those walleyes hanging around in the middle of the lake, chasing those cisco schools, those perch schools, those shad schools, whatever it is. And that's the food that they're going to key on late summer into early fall oftentimes. Now, late fall, you're still going to have fish out there. They're going to stay out there. They're going to keep eating those pelagic bait fish. But there's a seasonal movement of fish that move back shallow again in late fall, mid to late fall. And what happens is the weeds start dying shallow, and that exposes all the panfish that have been laying up in those weeds. They don't have cover anymore. So they start to become really vulnerable to walleyes, and there's a big push of fish shallow that kind of follow that migration of bait fish out of the weeds. Now into the early ice season, it's kind of the same thing. You can find fish just about anywhere. The water temps are really available throughout the lake. The oxygen's good, but typically I found the best luck around shallow weeds, early ice. Now as the winter progresses, the later it gets, the more that fish's metabolism is going to slow down, and they're going to get really, really finicky oftentimes and hard to catch around midwinter. You have to kind of downsize and finesse them a lot of times. Or one thing that's worked for me really well is move really shallow and use really big baits. If the walleyes are shallow, they're typically big, and they're looking to just down a huge meal so they don't have to chase a bunch of small meals. That works as well. So you can use either approach, and sometimes one works better than the other. That's kind of your annual bait cycle in most systems. Obviously, some places don't have those pelagic bait fish, and you're going to key on panfish more than anything, or bug hatches. And you really have to pay attention to those bug hatches, because once they happen, it's really hard to catch fish on bait fish, minnows, bait fish imitators, because those walleyes are so keyed on bugs. So that pretty much covers walleye food sources, and a couple of tips to figure out what they actually are eating. Number one, look for stuff that they're puking up as you catch them. You often see stuff kind of come out of their throat or in the live well. Check stomachs when you actually clean walleyes that you keep. And a third thing you can do is actually just look around you. You can look in the water, see clouds of bait fish, check your electronics, look for those minnow schools, keep your eyes peeled for bugs and cases floating on the surface of the water. And then a fourth tip is just to research it. Research the lake that you're fishing and check and see what the forage base is in that lake, so you're more knowledgeable when you actually go to the lake. So that pretty much covers walleye food sources. Now, before we get into number 4, I just have a really quick announcement. I wanted to thank you guys for all the support for my Achilles tendon injury. I'm sitting here still in a splint right now that I'm going to go get off this afternoon, actually, hopefully. And hopefully I'll be able to put weight on my foot soon. But I appreciate all you guys and your support. It means a lot to me. And just a reminder, I've recently opened the Hooked Up Wisconsin online store. where you can purchase my signature series of relevant sunglasses that I wear literally every day of the year. They are the perfect sunglasses for seeing into the water in most of these walleye lakes I'm talking about. Super comfortable, amazing technology, and I've got those on sale right now on the website. And you can also book a 30-minute or 60-minute coaching call with me, and we can go over all this stuff I'm talking about in more detail if you want. We can break down your home lake. We can get you prepped for a trip. Whatever you want to talk about, we can talk about. You can book those right on the website as well. So I will leave a link down below for the Hooked Up Wisconsin online store. And thank you guys for your support. I really appreciate it. And I'm hoping to get back on my feet and in the boat very soon. So with that update, let's get back into it with step number 4. Step number 4 is going to be determining your structure that you're going to be fishing on. Walleyes like structure. Now, when I say structure, I'm not talking cover. We're going to get to that in step 5. But step 4, we're just talking about the bottom contours of the lake and what to look for. Now, if you don't know what terminology I'm using, or if you're confused about the terminology, I have a full breakdown on every type of structure that you can imagine. I'll leave a link for that video below in case you want to learn more about structure. But let's start again in early spring. What are we looking for when it comes to structure? Early spring, typically those walleyes are going to be spawning around some kind of shoreline cover or moving water. So river inlets, current areas, wind-blown shorelines, and points and breaks or drop-offs are typically what we're going to be fishing early in the year. Those offshore structures, especially deeper ones, are typically going to be mostly void of walleyes in the springtime. Now, as those fish spawn, they start to back off a little bit. You'll start to see fish on connected structures, so points that extend underwater out into the main lake a little more. They're going to move a little deeper. They're going to start using those weed lines, which weeds are technically cover, but when they form a hard line, that's still really more of a structure than cover, and they'll start to kind of follow those weed edges. They're going to start to use rocky points and extensions, but they're still going to be typically near shore in that late spring period. Fish will relate to flats oftentimes that time of year too, so pay attention to that. You know, if you're not finding them on real obvious structures, start using your electronics, side scan, live scope, start looking around those big weed flats, especially that have char, grass, or short weeds on them. Early summer, again, they're not going to move far. They'll spread out a little bit. They're going to start moving away from those spawning areas and moving around bait more. They will start to use some of those offshore structures a little bit in early summer. Moving into late summer, those offshore structures are where you want to fish. Reefs, humps, islands, saddles, rock spines, those kind of things offshore are going to be absolutely deadly in late summer. Now, definitely pay attention to the basins too, because those fish in the late summer are going to move out into the basin as well. That kind of goes into the early fall transition. Now moving on to late fall, kind of that mid to late fall, fish can be just about anywhere. So there's oftentimes a large group of walleyes that hang out in that deeper structure way into the fall and into the winter. But you're going to have fish start moving onto those near shore structures again, and it kind of reverses back again in the late fall and then into early ice. And then again, late ice and midwinter, it kind of transverses back and fish start moving deep again. And then they move shallow again, late ice and early spring, and the whole cycle kind of continues. So certainly, if you're not seeing fish on a particular structure, just keep moving and start checking off the list, going down the list of structures, and eventually you're going to find fish. It's not a hard and fast rule, but this is a really good place to start again to look for fish when it comes to structure. All right, guys, we're getting close to figuring this out. So we've got our time of year down. We've got our water temps down. We've got our available food sources down. We've got our structure down. We're narrowing this thing down big time. Now, when it comes to the spot on the spot to get even closer to where those fish are at, you're going to use step number 5, and that is preferred cover types. Cover is a little bit different than structure. Cover is stuff that walleyes can move in between and out of that's going to protect them and hide them. Cover is going to include things like weeds, rocks, wood, cribs, that kind of thing that fish can actually kind of get in and around and hide around. So again, we'll start with spring. Spring cover typically is going to consist of what's left of the weeds from the winter, maybe some rock. You know, if you're fishing real shallow and there's no weeds, you might have some boulders or some rock. And that's about all the cover that is available to them shallow at that time of year. So either one of those, if you can find weeds or rock, are great early in the spring. And a combination of the two is probably the best. Now moving into late spring, it's all about weeds typically. If you have weeds in your lake, those fish are going to be in the weeds and around the weeds in late spring. It's an absolute money bet that there will be walleyes around weeds in late spring. Now there certainly can be some on rock as well. And we're talking mid-depth, you know, a little bit deeper than those spawning areas. And as that early spring moves into late spring, there's still going to be a lot of walleyes around the weeds. Those weeds are going to start growing deeper and deeper, and those walleyes are going to kind of follow those weeds out a lot of times. You're also going to have fish start moving onto that first kind of rock and gravel structure deeper than the weed line. And wood comes into play here too. And I've actually found that walleyes will hang around even fallen trees as long as they're fallen into deep enough water. But tree tops and any kind of wood cover in that mid-depth area just outside the weed line in early summer can be really, really good. So can cribs. So cribs start to come into play in that early summer period. And in Wisconsin, we have tons of cribs. Crib is just basically a piece of sunken structure, man-made structure, but they're typically past that weed line, and that's kind of where those fish are starting to transition to. Now, one of the best areas you can find for early spring is an area that has weeds that butt up to some of that deeper wood or crib structure or deeper boulders. Now moving into late summer, the cover that the fish can use is basically anything in the lake at that point. There's still going to be fish shallow in the weeds. There's going to be fish in that mid-depth wood and cribs and rock, but then there's also going to be fish on that offshore deep structure like your rock piles, your gravel bars, your deeper flats with some chara weeds on them. There's going to be fish in reservoirs, in the treetops, out in that deeper water where those trees have been flooded out, basically anywhere. And there will be fish just in the basin roaming around, whether that's out on the flats near the bottom or suspended. They will move away from cover oftentimes completely in the midsummer, chasing bait schools, hanging around that thermocline that we talked about earlier. Now again, late fall comes around, those fish are going to start relating much more heavily to structure again. And like I said, oftentimes that'll be deep rock piles and humps, as well as shallow weed lines again. They're going to start pushing up into that shallow cover. And wintertime, very, very common to find fish in weeds, but also kind of those classic structures are going to hold fish most of the wintertime, reefs and stuff like that. So that pretty much covers step number 5, and that's finding the fish's preferred cover. Now, if you can line up all 5 of these things into time of year, water temps, bait availability, the right structure, and the right cover, there will be walleyes. 100% there will be walleyes there. If you can get all 5 of those things to line up in your favor and the stars align, you're going to find them. Now, I'm going to show you how to kind of do that in a couple examples here. All right, let's go through example number 1. And I'm just going to do this off the top of my head. This is just a very common scenario in a very common time to fish. Let's say early May here in Wisconsin. And now we're out there the first couple of weeks of the season looking for those fish. So step number 1, seasonally, we know they are post-spawn, right? They're going to be off that first break, typically close to where they spawned. So we start looking there. We start using our electronics, start looking around. What's step number 2? Find the right water temperature. Well, it's a windy day. Let's say we got a 10-mile-an-hour south wind. We know that that wind is going to be pushing that warm water to the north end of the lake. That's where we're going to start our search. We're going to start searching where that warmest water has been blown in. We also know that there's a creek coming in on one part of that area, and that's pushing warm water in as well. So we're going to start right in that zone. Now, the next thing we want to do is determine whether there's food for those fish there. Late spring, what are we looking for? Bait fish and young of the year bait fish. So we watch our electronics. We see that there's a couple schools of bait fish kind of hanging around the mouth of that creek, right on that first break where those weeds are at. That's a really good sign that we should probably start fishing in that area. Now, In that area, there's a couple of points that come off the shoreline, and there's a hump just out from that creek. We're not going to fish that hump. Most likely those fish are going to be pushed up to the shoreline in those weeds, chasing those bait fish. So that's our structure. We're going to fish around that point, fish the inside turn, the outside turn, where those weeds are, and that structure kind of makes a little bit of a indentation and a point in the shoreline. There's some flat shoreline on either side, but since we've got structure, that's the best place to start. Now, number 5 is going to be cover. We already found weeds. We can also look for rock spine maybe coming off the end of that point, and maybe the weeds coming up to it, and get that combination of rock and weeds in one area. I can just about tell you where those walleyes are going to be. They're going to be on the end of that point where that rock starts to meet those weeds, and that bait becomes concentrated, and it's also a travel route where it pushes those fish moving around the end of that point. That's the spot on the spot that you want to start fishing. So that's just one example of how to put this pattern together. Now let's try going later on in the summertime. Let's go like a late summer, getting into early fall situation. So we know the fish are probably going to be deep. We don't need to pound the bank at this point. We can start looking deep. We start looking at the next factor, which is water temps. Let's say it's been a heat wave. Surface temps are pretty warm. We don't want to fish near the surface. We want to fish down below that thermocline, or near that thermocline, around 25 to 30 feet. Okay. Now, next factor, bait fish. Where are the bait at in the basin? We start scanning with electronics. We can start looking around for bait schools. We want to find the structure that's holding the bait. So check humps with electronics, look for bait, look for rocks, look for boulders on that structure to find the cover, which is step 5. So bait in depth on structure. If you find that, you're going to find walleyes. And oftentimes with your electronics, you can simply go over that structure and you can see those fish real easily in late summer. And you can kind of put things together relatively quickly. You don't have to necessarily use all the information, especially if you see the fish there, you can start fishing for them. So that's just another situation, kind of going through those 5 steps and how I break down a lake to find walleyes. So thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you got a ton of value out of this video. If you want me to make more videos like this, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. And I'll leave another video for you to watch at the end of this one. And don't forget about that Hooked Up Wisconsin store. There's some good stuff there, some good deals, chance to chat with me. And hopefully you find something there that you can use too. So thanks again, guys. We'll catch you next time. Get hooked up.